Okay, hello and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. To some of you, it may be morning if you're calling in from the West Coast, and to others, good afternoon. Thank you for attending this very interesting webinar during our annual winter blast with cold temperatures and 2/3 of the country down with snow and potentially out of power. So we appreciate your time and thank you for joining. The title of today's webinar is PFAS, an interesting priority for EHS professionals, what you should know and why you should care. My name is Milan Dayaial and I will moderate today's webinar. I lead our sales and marketing efforts in the Americas. We have two very exciting presenters today. First, we have Dave Kempisty. He's the Business Development Manager for Evoqua. Just a quick bio about Dave. He's a licensed engineer focusing on emergent contaminant issues and their solutions. He's a member of Evoqua's Environmental Solutions scientific and technical team involved in bench and pilot scale testing of activated carbons, ionic exchange resins, novel absorbents, and innovative technologies. As lead editor to the 2018 book, Perfluoroalkyl Substances in the Environment, and author to over 25 peer-reviewed papers and presentations on a variety of environmental topics, Dave provides a well-balanced perspective in today's environmental issues. Prior to Evoqua, Dave served 22 years in the United States Air Force. Thank you, David. Appreciate that. As an environmental engineer, Dave earned his PhD from the University of Colorado in Boulder in civil and environmental engineering and holds a Master of Science from the Air Force Institute of Technology and a Bachelor of Science from Michigan Technological University. Next, we have Matthew Myers, Senior Manager, Environmental Affairs, Evoqua. Matt leads domestic and international operations to ensure compliance with federal, state, and emerging environmental regulations, including PFAS. He has 15 years of corporate environmental consulting and compliance experience, specializing in air, waste, water, permitting, remediation, auditing, and regulatory reporting across industrial, manufacturing, pharmaceutical, agricultural, and DoD operations. Matt earned his Master's of Science in Environmental Management from Duquesne University and holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Westminster College in Pennsylvania. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited to present this emerging topic and well-qualified presenters for today, who have developed a deep understanding of PFAS rules as they are today and what we can expect in the near future. So without further ado, let's get right to it. But before that, just a few housekeeping notes. First, all attendees are muted to avoid any noise that could disrupt the webinar. Second, all questions should be posted in the chat box of the event, and we will respond to those questions at the end. Quick introduction to who we are. I represent Red Online, a French company headquartered in Paris, France, North American operations. I run out of New York, New York. Our goal is to become your global environmental health, safety, compliance, and risk management partner. In one sentence, we're the only global company that has the three pillars combined that's on your screen now, which happen to be regulatory content in 80+ countries in 15 languages, software, and consulting to implement it right the first time. So that's a bit about Red Online. And let's get on with our first presenter. But before that, I'll give you a quick rundown of our objectives today. What is PFAS? We'll address that right out of the gate. How PFAS is used. What solutions are available to industrial companies to remove PFAS. Next, we'll address current status of the regulations and where they're going in terms of direction. We'll summarize it, and then we'll open it up for questions. And with that, Dave Kempisty.
Thanks, Milan. Thank you all for having me here today. I'm excited to talk to you about PFAS. A couple obligatory slides here about Evoqua, and then we'll get underway. Lots of content, so I'm going to speak quickly, but hopefully not rush, if that's a possibility. This first one just kind of shows some numbers about Evoqua Water Technologies. We're a relatively new company, a spinoff of Siemens Water Technology in and around 2013. And we went public in 2017 under the ticker Aqua. But underneath the Evoqua umbrella, there's a large number of recognizable brands that you've perhaps heard of, and that gives us that 100-year legacy of performance and demonstrated know-how, such as Wallace and Tiernan, Neptune Benson being the official water quality sponsor of USA Swimming, which is Olympic town is Colorado Springs, which is where I'm talking to you from today. So, Evoqua, with regards to just talking about Evoqua a little bit more, we would like to market ourselves as applicable business partner for any operation that really touches water. And so when I first came on board, I was thinking about water, wastewater, drinking water, things of that nature, environmental remediation. That's true. But Evoqua is involved with all things, including mining operations, hydrocarbon and chemical processing operations, microelectronics, food and beverage. So the list goes on and on, but it's a broad canvas that Evoqua covers in the water space, which is what I'm trying to convey. This slide just talks to our purpose, our vision, and our values. And one that I just wanted to point out was our newest one, which is sustainability. And our sustainability measures measure both our footprint our environmental footprint that we internally as Evoqua measure and try to improve, but it also is our handprint. And by that, I mean how we affect our customers' environmental footprint. And so we help customers reduce their burden on the environment and measure that. So this first slide talks about PFAS and just kind of goes into what PFAS are. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So these are a group of man-made chemicals that I've got the tree here. We'll just touch on it briefly, then we'll leave it. I wrote 2 books, or did not write them, but it was my honor and pleasure to be the lead editor for both of these efforts. The second one, Viewers Right, is coming out in July of this year. But both books kind of really touch to 4 different challenges, 4 different areas where PFAS challenges present themselves and make it a dynamic issue. And that's the regulatory space, and these are constantly changing. The lack of a federal current regulation today, but state by state regulations exist. 14 of them exist today. 14 states have enforceable regulations. 29 have some sort of guidance values or are preparing regulations, and that's changing. This week earlier, I talked about Indiana, or read about Indiana posturing themselves for bringing in some of these regulations. Analytical space, the analytical limits of detection are lowering. You can identify more of these compounds, and that's continuously changing. We've got a EPA qualified method for drinking water, but we don't have a EPA certified methodology in the air phase or solid phase. Now you can get defensible analytical results, but it's not a agreed upon inter-laboratory certified process that exists today. So that's continuously changing. The toxicology of these chemicals is changing. So demonstrated adverse health effects and what those are. And again, you've got disparate efforts going on in the states that are creating regulations, and they're getting different toxicological endpoints for these chemicals. It makes things a challenge in that regard as well. And finally, environmental remediation, or the technologies to remove these chemicals. And so depending upon what chemicals you want to remove, to the levels which you want to remove them, or do you want to destroy these chemicals? By and large, we're using absorptive technologies today, but there are destructive technologies, but they are in scale and in power consumption. They're small in scale and high in power consumption, but those are continuously changing. So you've got all 4 of these facets that are dynamic and moving, which makes this market exciting, but continuously changing. Slide, please. So here's just some background on the polyfluoral substances. Again, they're man-made substances. They shouldn't be in the environment naturally anyways. And but they can be found in a lot of different products. You can see Viewers Right hand here, you've got your Egg McMuffin, and they repel both steam to keep your Egg McMuffin hot, but they also repel grease to keep your pants or your trousers clean when you're eating in the car, when you probably shouldn't be. But they're also found in firefighting foams, and they're very effective as a firefighting extinguishing agent, better than water for hydrocarbon Class B fires, hydrocarbon-based fires. Non-stick cookware. They're in carpets and stain repellent properties. So they're also found on upholstery, but they're found throughout society. They're found on outdoor performance gear for their water repellency. They're found in ski wax in Colorado. They're found, even in dental floss. And so they're showing up in lots of different places. They've been in use since the 40s with the discovery of Teflon. They make Teflon production better. The batches of Teflon would come out lumpy, but adding these chemicals to them created a more consistent product. The USS Forrestal is noted on this slide. So that was 234 souls lost in a fire aboard the USS Forrestal. And that was, we need a better firefighting extinguishing agent. And that was AFFF and the beginnings of creating aqueous film forming foam, which contain these chemicals. The two most infamous, perhaps, are PFOA and PFAS. We'll talk on the next slide about some nomenclature, but generally these are the two that get cited most often, and we have probably the most. We do have the most toxicology data on this, and the data to remove these from different environmental media. And it's because they have these strong carbon-fluorine bonds that make these chemicals difficult to degrade. They don't break down in the fire, which is why they're an effective firefighting agent, but they don't break down in the environment either. So we talk about two, but I have a bunch of numbers here. There are 6,330 of these which have registered chemical abstract numbers. Now, of those, only probably 602 or 600 are active in production. But then from there, you can even spin down further, and we look for, in the analytical methodologies that we're looking at, 25, 33, 25, 18, 14. So you're getting smaller and smaller numbers, but there are a large number of them out there. And if you can go to the next slide, we'll talk about some of the nomenclature. This pyramid here, we can think of this whole pyramid as PFAS, PFAS, which is perm polyfluoroalkyl substances, and that's the whole family. That would be the 6,330. And kind of think of it as the tip of the iceberg. First we looked at PFAS and PFOA, which are two of the 6,330, but there are others that we're also interested in that we can understand, and those are kind of the orange and the purple components of this graphic. But then you get into the substitutes, which are the fluorotelomers and the perfluoroethers. And so you can substitute some of these chemicals, some of the upper half of this floating iceberg here, with these perfluoroethers or these substitute chemicals, and still have some of the desirable properties, but our toxicology is lacking. They might be more difficult to remove from the environment. They might be less or more toxic. Just we have less information on these. And so that, the amount of information that we have diminishes as we go down this pyramid. And then I think it's animated, this slide kind of talks, one thing I want to kind of talk about too is some, with the nomenclature, you'll always see, or often see, short chain and long chain discussion. And so that is the length of the carbon tail that's associated with these. And so once shorter chain compounds are more difficult to remove, or with adsorptive media, generally speaking, but the longer chains are more easily removed. But again, the longer chains are where legacy contamination is often found, and the shorter chains are more mobile in the environment and more volatile as well. And I think that's all I really want to touch on the nomenclature slide. This I borrowed from MPART, which is the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. And so MPART depicted this cartoon, but it's showing how prevalent PFAS is in the environment today. And so you can have localized sources from primary producing PFAS industry, or those industries that use these chemicals can have them in their wastewater, but they can or they can be discharged directly to the environment, atmospheric deposition. And then once they're input into the environment, they're not easily removed with conventional treatment technologies like drinking water treatment technologies or wastewater treatment plant technologies. So from there, they can spread to rivers or surface waters or groundwaters, or they can be applied through biosolids to agricultural products, and then the proliferation continues. With regards to routes of exposure and the health effects associated with these. So the sources we kind of just talked about at the last, on the cartoon previous slide, but there are the primary producers, and then there's the commercial applications that use these. Then when you dispose of these chemicals, sometimes the waste will go to a landfill, and then there'll be landfill leachate, and then that landfill leachate will either need treatment or will go to a wastewater treatment plant. And we just mentioned the conventional treatment technology doesn't remove these chemicals. So that wastewater treatment facility could be discharging treated effluent back to groundwater or surface water and the biosolids, which you mentioned on the previous slide. But another source is the firefighting foam applications. So you'll find these around civilian aviation communities or Department of Defense facilities where they've used a lot of these firefighting foams in training activities or real world applications. The exposure routes, drinking water is the primary exposure route for affected communities, true statement. So if you have an affected community with PFAS, it's a drinking water exposure most likely that's delivering that burden. However, when you look at the global distribution of PFAS, atmospheric transport, contaminated food, consumer products, if you look at the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, which looks at the body burden in the US populace, you see that not over 97% of the populace has some form of these chemicals in their blood. Well, where does that come from? They might not be right next to a Department of Defense installation, but there's trace amounts of these in dust via the atmospheric transportation, or eating contaminated food, trace amounts, or in fish, or exposure to these consumer products. And then you can always talk about the occupational exposure if you're working directly with these chemicals or these firefighting foams as well. Adverse health effects, there's the toxicology jumping to the bottom, and these have been demonstrated through studies, but those are the disparate studies that I talked about across the different states, and so that makes things complicated. The C8 health study is an outcome of legislative action, and they did an epidemiological study of 69,000 people strong. So it's a pretty strong study, and they came away with 6 correlated adverse health effects associated with PFOA exposure, which are listed on this slide. Speaking to market drivers, I would say, and I've got state-based regulations at the top of this slide, and I've got state-based regulations at the bottom of this slide, and both of those are true, in that that's largely the main driver. And you've got these states that are more active and progressive. There is an EPA lifetime health advisory of 70 parts per trillion combined for PFOA and PFOS. But that's an advisory. It's being used oftentimes as a de facto standard, but you've got these state-based regulations, and that presents problems because you've got different numbers in different states. Michigan's regulating 7, California's regulating 2, but they're going to increase that to 9. And if you live in these states, then why am I allowed to drink 7 parts per trillion of PFNA in California, but I can't drink that in Michigan? And so you've got a lot of these disjointed efforts going along, and it's difficult for enterprises that work across multiple states that have to deal with these different regulations. So you've got a bunch of proposed regulations, non-scale regulations, guidance levels, and so forth. And American Water Works Association and the State Drinking Water Association has a bunch of great resources on trying to keep up with, and we keep up with, these emerging regulations and where they're coming and where they're going. Also to note, there can be drivers associated with public perception, brand protection, and making sure that none of these chemicals are found in finished products for certain customers that we have. So it's not a strict regulatory driver, but by and large, it goes back to those state-based regulations. this moves into PFAS removal solutions, and we have a variety of them. By and large, granular activated carbon and ion exchange resin are the two predominant ones that we're using because of the ability of scale up, and that we can handle large volumes of water, and they're effective at removing PFAS chemicals. Short chains are more difficult to remove. Resin can perhaps remove them better, but carbon still works for short chain. Resin still works for short chain. You'll just have greater, throughput, less throughput, and greater change out frequency of the media. Also quite effective at removing these chemicals from drinking water, from the water that you're treating. So granular activated carbon, very comfortable, consistent product. There's been in use since, found in Sanskrit text 2000 BC, where you would say, store your water in copper vessels, expose the sunlight, and filter through charcoal. Not activated carbon, but it's been documented that this technology has been around for a long time. A lot of people are comfortable with it, and regulators are comfortable with it. Where ion exchanges may be a newer technology, but not brand new, and it's very the market should be very comfortable with it, and is becoming more comfortable with this. Higher price, but also has a smaller footprint, and you're going to get probably a higher throughput. And so you got to balance those treatment costs, those considerations, when you determine what the optimal treatment technology is for you. And so moving through this, action steps. So what would we want to do next, and what would we want to look at next? And so one is assessing risk would be important for customers. What are the regulatory requirements in your area? Are those drivers coming? That's the temporal. Are they here today, or are they coming soon? And that's difficult to understand and predict. Or is there going to be a national MCL by the Environmental Protection Agency that would drive things? How about geographically? And that goes back to the state-based regulations. They're more active in some areas than others. And then the activity type, where chrome plating facilities are being compelled to treat and compelled to test in California currently. So you might want to take an assessment of that risk where they're not being compelled to treat in other states. So you have to understand and appreciate where the regulatory drivers currently are and where they're going, as well as, like we said, the brand protection concerns and articles that come out in consumer reports talking about various drinking water products, finished drinking water products. And regardless if there's a FDA, if they're below the FDA limits, or they're below lifetime health advisories from the EPA or the state that they're sold in, people don't want any of these chemicals in their purchased water or finished drinking water products. And so you have to consider that. So assess the risk for whether or not you want to sample and understand what you're going to do with the data once you get it. That's important instead of just going out sampling. We're talking about parts per trillion. So you might find these chemicals, but then what are you going to do with that data? Well, if you decide to sample, then there are a variety of considerations, and there's a bunch of letters on this screen here. And we're talking to standard operating procedures because you want to make sure that you're not cross-contaminating your samples. You want to make sure you have a national accredited, the right accreditation for your labs that are conducting this analysis for you. Is it going to be satisfy compliance requirements? There's the Department of Defense quality measures that are denoted, that are important, that those aren't just applicable to the Department of Defense. Some states have said that you have to comply with the DoD QSMs. And then there's method detection limits and method reporting limits, and know the difference and understand what the differences are, and just think through what you're going to do with that data and make sure that the quality of that data is consistent. And then the remedial alternatives. You want to understand what the life cycle costs are, what the it's not just the cheapest capital cost up front, but how are you going to handle subsequent media fills, or how are you going to handle the disposal of this spent media or the reject from the reverse osmosis membranes? How are you going to handle that? Or are you looking towards more of a destructive technology versus the concentration methods that are more traditionally used today just because they can handle the higher volumes. So Red Online can help with step one in understanding kind of the risk associated with your particular industry or your particular area at this point in time and what the future looks like in your area. And Evoqua can help with steps 2 and 3. At this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart, Matt, and he's going to talk through the next couple slides.
Thanks, Dave. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Matt Myers with Evoqua here. So I've got 3 slides really geared at kind of the corporate EHS professional, maybe a site plant EHS manager, and 3 slides on probably a topic Dave and I could probably speak 3 days uninterrupted, right? So you're getting the flyby version. So just diving right in. As of today, February 18th, PFAS is not a hazardous waste or a hazardous air pollutant or a hazardous substance. You're likely aware that literally a month ago this week, EPA introduced notice of proposed rulemaking to potentially regulate as a hazardous waste and or a hazardous substance. So they're soliciting public input there. As Dave already touched on, health advisory limits state by state new action levels in Pennsylvania, 70 parts per trillion. Toxic release inventory. This is something new that likely everyone will be encountering this year for the first time, a retroactive look back in reporting year 2020. So for a litany of PFAS substances, you will be evaluating, did you process, manufacture, otherwise use these at these thresholds? And the threshold is much, much lower, 100 pounds. And then you'll meet the reporting obligations should you meet that threshold. As it pertains to CERCLA, the Biden administration has indicated that their EPA will want to regulate as a hazardous substance. We don't know what that might look like, but we're obviously interested in tracking that. And so what does that mean for you? Understanding that there's probably some potential indications of regulation there, which could create a pathway for liability, cleanup, might be a trigger for a new investigation or a cleanup. So if you are currently investigating a site for various contaminants, this might be a polishing step where you will also have to meet this new PFAS limit in addition there. We don't know yet. Certainly linked with CERCLA is the RQs, the reportable quantities. So we envision this would likely to have a state-by-state impact. And what does that look like in Massachusetts versus Texas? Obviously reporting for a reporting obligation there. And last but certainly not least, TSCA, SNRS, and SNUNS, my 2 favorite acronyms, significant new use rules and notices. You're likely also aware that just last month, EPA published their final guidance on their 2020 SNR, which in short, you can read it obviously, but you're prohibited from importing, manufacturing, or processing any long chain PFAS without approval. And then there's also various other prescriptive measures that you have to meet as it pertains to that. On the next slide here, this is the EPA's interim guidance document that was released right before the Christmas holiday. So if you were like me, you probably spent some of your Christmas break poring over this and trying to understand what it means. I think a couple key takeaways, right? So it's the outcome of the National Defense Authorization Act. EPA said they were going to publish this, and they do a good job of saying, hey, this is not a rule, this is not a regulation, not a statement of policy, it's an evaluation, essentially. That graphic there comes right from their guidance document on page 2 there. So where do you fit into that schematic there? Are you a producer, a treater? Are you a consumer? Understanding that life cycle there. And it is essentially a guidance document where they are evaluating various phases of PFAS and then also phases of treatment. So they look at landfills, thermal treatment, underground injection, kind of the pros and cons of both in an evaluation. My favorite soundbite was in 2015, there was 25,000 metric tons of PFAS manufactured at 38 US sites. So let that sink in. There's a lot of PFAS out there. Where does it go? What's the life cycle look like? And certainly I'm not a spokesperson for EPA or anything like that, but they do a good job, I think, of saying that there's limited data. There's still no approved test methods. And then they do a fair job of mapping out what does year 1 look like up to year 3 and 5 in terms of additional projects, other guidance. It's not going away. They're certainly looking at it there and paint kind of a picture for what the future holds. And then lastly, I think we talk about the great state of California. So if you do work in California, you might be familiar with this assembly bill, where it is mandating that certain entities test for PFAS in their water source. So whether you are a private water supplier, you are essentially providing water to various consumers, your plant, whatever, you will have to test if you are one of those select facilities, and you have to test quarterly, report results, post results. And some of the blips on that California Water Board map there are really made up of dozens of blips. I believe the first invitation was if you were nearby an airport, and then they expanded the invitation there to nearby based on results there. So no secrets, they've made Swiss cheese out of the state of California looking at various PFAS strands there. And if you're a corporate EHS professional, you might be linked at the hip with your insurance folks, your risk folks. Emerging contaminants are starting to pop up on exclusions from your insurance. So you might be talking to your insurance broker, your underwriter, your agent of things like glyphosate, PFAS, a laundry list of other things where you might be paying the same amount of money, but these are excluded from your insurance. So something to track. And then lastly, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but there's various tracking mechanisms that I'm sure you're well aware of. You can get the Federal Register delivered to your inbox every morning, and you can pick and choose what programs are meaningful to you, and tracking both federal and state updates as it relates to both PFAS and obviously other things. And then staying connected with your local trade association. It's a great way to obviously network with your peers, but then also keep a good finger on the pulse in the local landscape as well. And I'm sure Milan and your friends at Red Online will probably talk about how they can help as well in tracking PFAS regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And this is back to how Evoqua can help with, and so we try to paint this comprehensive solution and this comprehensive offering of what we can, if you're dealing with these contaminants and you need to remove them from a water source, things that you might want to look at. And this is the portfolio that we offer that is, first would involve temporary treatment solution. And so you can get treatment on site today, not today, but in a week, 2 weeks time, as opposed to designing some of these larger scale systems that might take upwards, depending upon the cost and a grant that you have to pursue and get regulatory approval. And, for long-term treatment, that can take upwards of a year, maybe longer. And so you can get rapid response, emergency response, and make water today with temporary mobile assets. And so that's one aspect of a comprehensive portfolio. Then the middle picture here is a treatability study. And so all these different we provided the largest pilot study in the United States for a group of municipalities in the California area. And they tested 8 different granular activated carbons, 4 different ion exchange resins, and 2 different novel medias. And we're removing parts per trillion, but you've also got parts, magnitudes more of other organics in the water, and those can affect the different media different ways. So there is no one media performing to remove PFAS across the continental United States. Even in the same aquifer, you can have different media perform differently. And so the idea for this entity was to test the 8 carbons and 4 resins and 2 novel medias and see which one, no kidding, works better for that particular water to meet their particular treatment objectives. So each water is unique, each treatment objective is different. And then you can then do that cost benefit analysis and understand what is the optimal treatment solution. You've got the rapid response going on, that's removing it, but it's maybe not optimized. The treatability study, along with modeling, along with maybe bench scale testing, can identify the optimal solution. And then you can move to the permanent solution. Viewers left those 20,000, those vessels right there can hold 20,000 pounds of media. And so you can move those into place and to treat large volumes of water with the optimal media that you found in the previous step, the treatability study. Then you have to think through again, once that media is exhausted, how are you going to get fresh media in? What are you going to do with the old media? How are you going to dispose of it through a landfill or an incinerator? Or if you've got granular activated carbon and there's some sustainability benefits to reactivating that carbon. You can look through that. We offer that servicing network, and we have that throughout the United States. And so that's another thing that you want to make sure you're covering is how you're going to service this from beginning to end. So that's kind of our comprehensive portfolio that I wanted to kind of finish off and tie up with.
Great. Thank you very much, David and Matthew. Appreciate the insights on PFAS. Definitely two individuals who know this topic well, and I would ask you to reach out to them when the need arises in your organizations to discuss this topic with some professionals who truly understand it at a deeper level. From our perspective here at Red Online, first, thank you very much for presenting on behalf of us and doing the necessary preparations. Red Online has an experienced network of legal specialists, we call, but they're actually attorneys who work for us globally in 85 plus countries. And they do the research at the federal and state level or country and regional level and provide that update to our customers by virtue of tailoring the news and alerts and regulations and audit questions to the site level, so that at the site level, you're not receiving any noise. You only receive applicable regulatory requirement changes and change notifications. These notifications come to you on a weekly basis that highlights all the regulatory changes. On a quarterly basis, we also challenge the profile of the customer that we have so that we're constantly sending you the most up-to-date and accurate information. We also provide PFAS coverage. We provide COVID-19 coverage in all the 85, 86 countries where we provide regulatory content. And now we also started covering WFH requirements, if you know what those are, work from home requirements in all those countries, since a large portion of our workforce globally is working remotely. And of course, we provide ongoing EHS regulatory support. This is a part of our annual subscription. So if you have a question regarding a particular regulation, you have a person that you can speak to in your local jurisdiction. And this is on the regulatory side. On the software platform side, we have multiple applications. The legal register and compliance and regulatory monitoring tools work in combination with one another, where when we implement the solution, we implement it at the site level by creating site-specific legal registers so that those sites can focus on everything that's applicable and nothing else. We have a planning tool that enables an organization to manage all their compliance activities, corrective, preventive actions, tasks, compliance calendaring activities, periodic monitoring activities, just to give you some examples. And we have all the NAGWare built in so that people can be held accountable and that you have visibility at any level of the organization for better decision making. We offer an event tracking, which is an incident management and reporting tool. We offer risk management tools, sustainability reporting, and document management, to name a few. So if any of these things interest you or you want to learn more about any of these applications or Red Online, please let us know, because we offer an integrated footprint that speaks to 15 languages globally for our clients around the world. And with that, we'll open it up for some questions. I already see one question for either David or Matthew regarding TSCA prohibition of long-chain PFAS import manufacturing. Does it apply to articles? Is there a de minimis quantity?
That's a good question. Shooting from the hip there. So articles, there's exclusions and exemptions in TSCA. Exclusions are all your FDA, your FIFRA, pesticides, firearms, things like that. And then there's exemptions from there. So the question's asking, is there exemptions from articles there? So there are articles exempt from TSCA, most certainly. I think there was chatter in that TSCA SNR about surface coatings on articles. I won't pretend to have memorized that SNR. It was a long one, but I think if that person is interested, they should look at the surface coatings on on articles. And I think there, to their question, there might be de minimis. Sometimes in Tosca it was like 0.1 or 1%, things like that. So you might be able to get an uninvited from that dance for 2 reasons there. Something for you to look into there.
Great. While we don't have any other questions, there is an overarching question about getting your hands on the slides. We will send these slides to the individuals that request it so that we don't create unnecessary email and network traffic. So if you desire to see one in your inbox, please let us know on the chat and we will get that to you. But I think while we're waiting to see if we have any more questions, one final comment. Evoqua and Red Online have, I think, one ultimate mission in mind, and that is let's not compromise what we have today for future generations. And that really is what creates a good synergy between 2 companies. And so we're happy to present this with you and work with Evoqua in case you are a Red Online client and need some of these services. Let us know. We can make this introduction to Evoqua as well. Do you have any media that can be used in passive stormwater system? That's another question that just came in.
Yeah, certainly. And so the different medias that we have can be applied to, you know, industrial applications and municipal applications. Generally speaking, the municipal water would be a cleaner matrix for us. Stormwater would fit somewhere in between there. And there could be pre-treatment concerns or configurations that we'd like to incorporate in there to remove out any, you know, sort of oils and greases or remove particulates, total suspended solids, things of that nature ahead of time. But yeah, the media would certainly be applicable. And we do have, I'm dealing with one of those applications currently, treating stormwater that is contaminated with perfluoroalkyl substances.
Got it. Thank you, David. All right. I think that's all for the questions. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending our webinar. David and Matthew, thank you very much for your expert presentations. And if you have any ideas from the audience on topics that you want to hear from us at Red Online on a webinar like this, please let us know. We'd be happy to put something together. That's how this webinar came about. And we appreciate your time. I know we're in a busy time of the year. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And have a great day and stay warm. Take care.
Thanks all.
Thank you, guys.